Speaker Pelosi, you resisted calls for the impeachment of President Bush in 2006 and President Trump following the Mueller report earlier this year. This time is different. Why did you oppose impeachment in the past? And what is your obligation to protect our democracy from the actions of our president now?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the question about, because when I became Speaker the first time, there was overwhelming call for me to impeach President Bush on the strength of the war in Iraq, which I vehemently opposed. And I said at other places, that was my wheelhouse. I was intelligence. I was the ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, even before I became part of the leadership of Gang of Four. So I knew there were no nuclear weapons in Iraq. It just wasn't there. They had to show us, they had to show the Gang of Four all the intelligence they had. The intelligence did not show that that was the case. So I knew it was a misrepresentation to the public. But having said that, it was in my view, not a grounds for impeachment.
It's the faithless logician, dropping what's been missing, coming for the jugular, but not let me catch you slipping. No tool needed other than my mind to dissect these delusions and correct them in real time. The slayer of dogma and baseless assertions don't come with that weak shit or you'll soon need a surgeon. But it's too late for your argument. It's been torn to shred. There is no coming back. It is completely dead. All I need is my brain and my pen to use as I see fit to flay and or mend these inexcusable policies that are impossible to defend. All I need is my brain and my pen. No trust needed, just take a second and listen as I redirect and clear your clouded attention to focus on the facts, evidence, and testable predictions, painting a picture to help explain these insights, hypotheses, and suspect claims, giving you the tools needed to separate the truth from the false and the utterly inane. The marks are legion and too many to name, but they all love money, bathing in it with no shame, while the rest of us fight over their scraps, struggling just to maintain. They've never read a war that they would not fund, yet they treat citizens asking for health care as low-life scum. But we're done asking, so get ready, because here the we come.
So just to be clear, Nancy, you're saying that lying the American people into a war which led to the death of at least a few 100,000, if not 500,000 people, mostly civilians, while injuring twice that amount, not to mention completely destroying and destabilizing a relatively stable country and torturing some folks in the process, is not impeachable. Yet the call to Ukraine totally is. But even if the latest charges against Trump are impeachable, that does not explain why she would immediately take impeachment off the table as soon as she and Obama had complete control of the government. I wonder if it could possibly have anything to do with the fact that she was completely aware there was no evidence whatsoever to suggest Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, yet failed to warn the American people, as she inexplicably admits to in this CNN town hall.
That was my wheelhouse. I was intelligence. I was the ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, even before I became part of the leadership of Gang of Four. So I knew there were no nuclear weapons in Iraq. It just wasn't there. They had to show us, they had to show the Gang of Four all the intelligence they had. The intelligence did not show that that was the case. So I knew it was a misrepresentation to the public.
Or maybe it's that she was also privy to the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques being used on our first victim of many, Abu Zubaydah, way back in April of 2002, which incidentally led to absolutely no new intelligence, which is the expected result when employing such antiquated, barbaric methods. Whatever the case, she's saying this Ukraine phone call is worse than that horrific hot mess. So I guess I better start doing some research.
One eternity later.
Okay, that was mind-numbing, but this is what it boils down to. The Democrats have levied 2 charges of impeachment against the Donald. The first article claims Trump pressured the Ukraine to investigate the Bidens in order to weaken his political opponent, which I think is awfully audacious for the establishment Democrats to assume that creepy Uncle Joseph will win the nomination. Though, as the DNC stated in court, they can pick any nominee they want, so maybe they already have made that decision. but I digress. He also supposedly asked for an investigation into whether or not the Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election on behalf of the Clinton campaign. To the first allegation, whether Trump wanted an investigation into why Hunter Biden, a man with no prior connection to Ukraine and with zero experience in the energy industry, was given such a lucrative salary and seat on the board of Burisma or not, the reality is no such investigation ever took place. As to the latter, due to a recently surfaced audio recording that reportedly quotes a high-ranking official claiming his agency intentionally leaked the so-called Black Ledger with the sole purpose of helping Hillary Clinton win the 2016 election, Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko has recently opened an investigation. But I'm not sure exactly what is supposed to be impeachable about this. Second article of impeachment, obstruction of justice, basically amounts to the Democrats whining about the Republicans, specifically the executive branch, for not fully cooperating with the charades showcased daily by the Democrats in Congress. And disagreements between the executive branch and the legislative branch are supposed to be settled by the judicial branch, no? Instead of going after Trump on any number of the myriad of legitimate impeachable acts he has committed, such as habitually violating the Emoluments Clause, facilitating a genocide in Yemen, or signing into law the single biggest transfer of wealth in modern history. The last one may not be impeachable, though it would be a perfect policy to run against in November. But bizarrely, instead, the Democrats have an infatuation with projecting their own faults and fuck-ups onto Trump. Narrative: Trump has shady ties with Russia. Reality: it was the Clintons, with the help of the Obama administration, that sold off 20% of the United States' supply of uranium to the Russians. Narrative: Russia interfered with our election in 2016. Reality: the United States interferes with seemingly every election, everywhere, always. Narrative: Trump used his political influence to dig up dirt on a political opponent via a foreign country. Reality: it was Hillary Clinton that hired the infamous Fusion GPS, who employed Christopher Steele, an unreliable ex-British spy, to go to Russia and dig up dirt on her hand-picked political opponent. This produced the completely bogus, repeatedly discredited Steele dossier, which was the centerpiece of the Mueller report, which, to remind you, did not find any grand Russian conspiracy. But back to the circus of today. Trump's supposed leverage in this cunning Ukrainian scheme and the meat of this mummer's farce seems to center around the $391 million U.S. taxpayer-funded aid package, which, from the way the Democrats are talking about it, could contain nothing less than manna from heaven and the cure for cancer. But this is not humanitarian aid. The aid in question is actually lethal military assistance, specifically Javelin missiles that even the Obama administration would not commit to delivering for fear of provoking a war with another nuclear power. Despite repeated requests from the fascist-friendly, anti-Russian, pro-Nazi president at the time, Pedro Poroshenko. But Trump did deliver the aid package, despite no investigation into the Bidens. So where is the quid pro quo? But more importantly, this military buildup on the Russians' border is only the latest in a long chain of aggression that the West, via NATO, has been slowly tightening around Russia's neck ever since the reunification of Germany, which was supposed to be the end of the Cold War, when the United States promised the Russians they would not move 1 inch closer. But as this map details, we are not one for keeping promises. But we can't bring that up, nor can we talk about the nearly 20-year-old boondoggle of an occupation known as the war in Afghanistan, where, thanks to what's being called the Afghan Papers, we've recently learned that every administration since the beginning has been lying to us, and that despite spending nearly $2 trillion, the Taliban is now more powerful than it has ever been, while most of its civilians live in poverty. Nor can we talk about how the Democrats just helped Trump solidify his power by first reauthorizing the Patriot Act and then by giving him everything he wanted in his $738 billion defense budget, from banning transgendered troops to funding the Space Force. But it does not include an amendment that would have blocked spending on the genocide in Yemen, nor does it require the Congress to vote on any future conflict with Iran. But don't worry, to help offset these necessities, the Trump administration has recently made cuts to social programs such as food stamps, Medicaid, Romney Care, and a litany of other programs that do not affect Trump and his sociopathic brethren of the 1%. And don't even think about bringing up the fact that we're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event, which is completely man-made. No, we do not have time for such trifling matters. We must save our outrage for that which is really important, such as getting back at that orange buffoon for lying to the American people better than Hillary could. But fine, let's play the hypothetical. Say that a majority of the House does vote to impeach Trump, which is a real possibility considering the Democrats have the majority. That only gets them to the next stage, which is a trial in the Senate. There, you need 2/3 of the Senate to vote in favor of impeachment in order to actually remove the president from office, which is never, ever, ever going to happen. And even if it did, that would leave us with the misogynistic bigot, theocratic fundamentalist, wannabe end times usher, Mike Pence, who may or may not support torturing members of the queer community. Which should make it painfully obvious that these impeachment theatrics are nothing but a huge obfuscation to keep the masses distracted and ignorant to the fact that we are ruled by one corporate party, and it's in that party's best interest to keep us divided. If Nancy Pelosi or any other establishment Democrat actually gave a fuck about the rule of law, George Bush would be in a jail cell right now, not in a luxury box laughing it up with fellow government spook Ellen DeGeneres. We have a chance this primary season to actually nominate a legitimate progressive agent of change, which scares the living shit out of the establishment. Fuck Trump, fuck Nancy Pelosi, and fuck the establishment. It's time for some real motherfucking change. Please like, subscribe, and share. Jana.
You're saying Article 1 gives us complete authority that when we demand information from another branch, it must be turned over or we'll impeach you in record time. Now, making that worse is that you have such a short investigation. It's a perfect storm. You set an incredibly short period, demand a huge amount of information, and when the president goes to court, you then impeach him. Now, does that track with what you've heard about impeachment? Does that track with the rule of law that we talked about? So, on obstruction, I would encourage you to think about this. In Nixon, it did go to the courts, and Nixon lost. And that was the reason Nixon resigned. He resigned a few days after the Supreme Court ruled against him. What that did for the judiciary is it gave this body legitimacy. It wasn't the Rodino extreme position that only you decide what information can be produced. But I can't emphasize this enough, and I'll say it just one more time. If you impeach a president, if you make a high crime and misdemeanor out of going to the courts, it is an abuse of power. It's your abuse of power. You're doing precisely what you're criticizing the president for doing. We have a third branch that deals with conflicts of the other two branches. And what comes out of there and what you do with it is the very definition of legitimacy. Now, there are three distinctions when you look at these, or three commonalities when you look at these past cases. All involved established crimes. This would be the first impeachment in history where there would be considerable debate and, in my view, not compelling evidence of the commission of a crime. Second is the abbreviated period of this investigation, which is problematic and puzzling. This is a facially incomplete and inadequate record in order to impeach a president. President Trump will not be our last president. And what we leave in the wake of this scandal will shape our democracy for generations to come. I'm concerned about lowering impeachment standards to fit a paucity of evidence and an abundance of anger. I believe this impeachment not only fails to satisfy the standard of past impeachments, but would create a dangerous precedent for future impeachments. So I will conclude with this. Both sides of this controversy have demonized the other to justify any measure in their defense. Perhaps that's the saddest part of all of this. We have forgotten the common article of faith that binds each of us to each other in our Constitution. However, before we cut down the trees so carefully planted by the framers, I hope you will consider what you will do when the wind blows again, perhaps for a Democratic president. Where will you stand then?